George Earl Preddy Jr. was born on 5th February 1919 in Greensboro, North Carolina, the second of four spirited children whose earliest memories were framed by the clatter of textile looms and the sweet smoke of backyard garden fires. His father, a cotton mill mechanic, and his mother, who sold vegetables door to door, kept the family afloat during the thinnest years of the Depression. But nothing in that frugal household could compete with the glamour of airplanes. On Saturdays, the boy rode his bicycle to the edge of the municipal airfield, pressed his face to the chain-link fence, and watched barnstormers loop their Jenny biplanes until sky and earth traded places. By the time he was 12, he had memorized every maneuver he saw above the grass strip and sketched dream airplanes in the margins of his school books. He vowed, quietly because big dreams could sound foolish in mill villages, that one day he would be the man in the cockpit, pushing the stick forward as the horizon inverted. Preddy's first tangible step toward that vow came when he scraped together enough coins to buy 10 minutes in a tattered Curtiss Wright Jr. flown by a carnival pilot who sold rides at county fairs. The moment the machine lifted over the treetops and the wind hammered his face, the boy felt an almost physical realignment of destiny. Aviation became religion, mathematics, geography, and baseball shrank into minor side interests. Through high school, summers he chased barnstorming circuits, offering to wipe down wings, pump fuel, or hold crowd ropes in exchange for a few minutes in an open cockpit. Pilots soon noticed that the soft-spoken Greensboro kid could already read an oil-streaked airspeed indicator better than many paying passengers, and that he never panicked when the airplane hedge-hopped low over a hayfield. In September 1940, with Europe at war and the United States clinging to neutrality, Preddy enlisted in the North Carolina National Guard's Coast Artillery. The pay was small but steady. More important, the uniform allowed him to file formal applications for flight training. 3 times the Navy rejected him. Too short, borderline blood pressure, eyes a hair outside specification, and 3 times he dug in harder, running laps around the parade ground to convince the flight surgeon that borderline fitness could be pushed to regulation excellence by force of will. At last, on 29 April 1941, the Army Air Corps accepted him as an aviation cadet. 8 months later, 5 days after Pearl Harbor, he pinned silver wings to his tunic at Craig Field, Alabama, and stepped into a world war that seemed suddenly personal. Australia, not Europe, became his first deployment. The 49th Pursuit Group reached Darwin in early 1942, just as Japanese bombers rained destruction on the northern coast. Preddy flew P-40 Warhawks in monotonous patrols over crocodile-infested swamps, straining his eyes against equatorial haze for a flicker of enemy propellers that rarely appeared. Loneliness shadowed every sunrise mission until 12th of July 1942, when a mid-air training collision tore the wing off his P-40, smashed his leg, and hurled him into the sea. Fishermen dragged him to a hospital hut, where doctors predicted a year in. A plaster. He was back on crutches after 7 months, hobbling down hospital corridors, demanding clearance to fly. Stateside again in winter 1942-43, he joined the newly formed 352nd Fighter Group at Westover Field, Massachusetts. In July, the group sailed aboard RMS Queen Elizabeth and established itself at RAF Bodney in East Anglia. Their Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, robust radial-engined brutes, excelled at dive bombing but lacked the range to escort B-17 Flying Fortresses. Beyond the Dutch coast, it was a cruel apprenticeship. German fighters queued just outside Thunderbolt range, waiting for bombers suddenly bereft of cover. Preddy absorbed every bitter lesson. He learned economy of motion in combat. 1 burst, 1 kill, never squander altitude, never pursue a decoy deeper than the ammunition trays could sustain. Everything changed when the Merlin-powered North American P-51 Mustang arrived in the spring of 1944. The blue-nosed machines, their spinners and cowlings painted deep azure for quick identification, could roam over Berlin and still bring pilots home with reserve fuel. Preddy christened his P-51 Cripes a Mighty, a craps table oath he considered lucky. On 6th of August, 1944, over Hamburg, he wrote his name into 8th Air Force legend by downing 6 enemy fighters before lunch, the greatest single-day total recorded by any U.S. pilot that year. Promotions followed quickly. By October, he commanded the 328th Fighter Squadron, and the blue-nosed bastards of Bodny earned whispered praise from bomber crews who felt the scythe-like dives of blue spinners ward off Messerschmitts. Pilots who served under him remembered a commander who instructed by flying lead rather than drilling lectures. Replacement flyers arrived wide-eyed. Preddy led them through airwork in the practice area, showed them how to set the new K-14 gyro gun sight, and drew chalk diagrams of deflection angles on a battered blackboard in a drafty dispersal hut. Asked why he always flew in the front element, he smiled. The front seat sees the weather first. In mid-December 1944, Hitler launched the Ardennes offensive, later called the Battle of the Bulge. For more than a week, low cloud and blowing snow grounded most Allied fighters, while German armor plunged into Belgium. On 23rd of December, the weather lifted. The 352nd relocated to Advanced Landing Ground Y-29 at Asch, Belgium, scraping snow and frozen mud from the temporary steel mat runway. Christmas Eve produced only scattered clashes, but Christmas morning dawned crystal clear, above 10,000 feet and bitingly cold on the ground. Someone pinned a sprig of holly to the operations map, the mess sergeant hoarding a precious sack of Illinois sugar, ladled real sweetness into metal coffee cups. Few airmen pretended it would be a holiday, but small comforts still mattered. Preddy briefed 10 pilots for a patrol south of Koblenz. Fuel for 3 hours, engage fighters only, stay clear of the flak belts. If the Luftwaffe wants a Christmas present, he said, grin half hidden behind a steaming mug, we'll wrap it in 50 caliber ribbon. At 09:15, the Mustangs thundered off the mat, climbed toward pastel sunlight, and leveled above the snow-obscured Ruhr dams. For 2 uneventful hours, nothing but contrails appeared on the horizon. Then the sector controller barked a call. Enemy aircraft, low altitude, grid reference Echo 3. Preddy rolled inverted, dropped through shredded cumulus, and spotted 6 If-109s weaving below. His initial burst shattered the canopy of the lead German. A second burst struck another, which erupted in flame and spiraled earthward. Official tallies later credited Preddy with victories 26 and 27, edging him closer to top Mustang ace of the war. The remaining Messerschmitts split south toward Liège. Preddy and his flight followed at treetop height, throttles, wide, cold air hammering through unheated cockpits. On the ground, near the Ourthe River, an American anti-aircraft battery, Battery C, 430th Automatic Weapons Battalion, watched the chase arrow toward their position. Earlier that morning, the same battery had endured a brutal strafing run by Focke-Wulf 190s. Nerves were frayed, fingers clamped white around triggers. To the gunners, the overflight presented 3 single-engine machines scarcely distinguishable. By silhouette, dark shapes, muzzle flashes, the thunder of 12 wing-mounted Brownings. In a heartbeat, a corporal depressed the foot pedal of his quadruple 50 caliber mount. 8 armor-piercing incendiary rounds streaked upward. Shrapnel tore. Holes in Cripes a Mighty's radiator, ruptured coolant lines, and punctured the wing. A single slug severed the femoral artery in Preddy's thigh. His final transmission, "They're shooting at us," crackled through static. Glycol sprayed the windshield. He tried to belly land in a snow-dusted pasture beyond a hedgerow, but the left wingtip clipped the frozen embankment, and the Mustang somersaulted, disintegrating in shrieks of aluminum. Infantrymen sprinted from the gun pit, dragged the unconscious pilot into a jeep, and sped toward a field hospital. He died. Within 10 minutes, blood soaking a wool flying suit that had once seemed proof against winter. At Ash, ground crews counted returning Mustangs and saw one slot empty. In a frozen revetment, a mechanic kicked at slushy snow, suspecting the worst before headquarters confirmed it. Colonel Martin Blakesley drafted a telegram every commander. Dreads. Deep regret to inform you of the death of your son, Major George E. Preddy, Jr., killed in action over Belgium. In London, Bait Fighter Command updated the victory board. 2683 confirmed kills, the highest score for any Mustang pilot. Greensboro newspapers printed a front page bordered in black. Local church bells tolled that Christmas night in sorrow rather than celebration. A board of inquiry convened in Namur on 29 December. Investigators collected spent cartridge links, measured bullet trajectories, and interviewed the shaken gunners. The entire tragedy, they concluded, had occupied less than 7 seconds, a lethal collision of low altitude, snow glare, and combat adrenaline. No blame attached, only the grim arithmetic of wartime confusion. Recommendations called for stricter altitude restrictions on pursuit aircraft over friendly lines and accelerated work on electronic friend or foe identification systems. Painful though the findings were, they pushed doctrine forward. By February 1945, the War Department forbade fighters to descend below 500 feet inside the bomb line unless ground liaisons specifically requested help. Engineers at Wright Field redoubled research on infrared recognition lamps, precursors to modern IFF transponders. Manuals issued to artillery units carried a new cautionary heading, "Beware low-flying friendly fighters," illustrated with a silhouette of a P-51. Preddy's remains were first interred in a Belgian churchyard and later reburied at the Lorraine American Cemetery in Saint-Avold, France. In April 1945, his 20-year-old brother Bill, also a P-51 pilot, was mortally wounded by flak over Czechoslovakia. He lies alongside George beneath white marble crosses facing east. Decades later, their cousin Joe Noah founded the Preddy Memorial Foundation, funding scholarships for aviation students and erecting a kiosk at Piedmont Triad International Airport. Travelers on early morning flights sometimes pause at the display, run fingers over the polished model of Cripe's A Mighty 3, and watch grainy gun camera footage loop on a tiny screen, where contrails unspool across a black and white sky. Greensboro, eventually renamed a stretch of Interstate 85, Preddy Boulevard, ensuring that commuters mutter his surname daily, perhaps unaware of its story. Each Christmas, veterans and historians post digital tributes across forums and social media recounting the last flight. Some recall that Preddy's personal score never mattered to him as much as bomber crews saved. Others note how swiftly joy can curdle in war. Few disagreements erupt, for the facts are clear and sobering. Heroism measured merely in numbers risks abstraction, yet the statistics remain dazzling. 6 victories in a single mission, 27 overall, hundreds of fortresses escorted. Those figures, however, fail to capture the deeper resonance of his final minutes. That resonance resides in the silence over a Belgian pasture after the Jeep engine faded, when smoke from burning magnesium curled into a sky meant for rejoicing, not mourning. It resides in the artilleryman who approached the wreckage and understood too late that war's fog can blind friend and foe alike. Modern visitors to the Ardennes drive past reconstructed villages where church bells again peal each Christmas. Morning, wheat grows on the hillside where Cripe's A Mighty shattered. Cows wander among hedgerows once shredded by wing and propeller. A brass plaque near Liège lists Preddy's name beside Belgian soldiers killed the same week, binding international sacrifices into one narrative. Amateur historians organize walking tours each December, tracing the final route of the blue-nosed Mustangs. They stop at a fence line, imagine the roar overhead, and grapple with the uneasy truth that victory often balances on tragic missteps. If posterity seeks a single sentence to explain why Major George Earl Preddy Jr. matters, it might begin like this: he fought to protect others until his final breath, diving beneath his own side's guns to drive away threat, and in that self-same devotion met a fate no strategist could foresee. In such contradiction lies the broader Allied wartime experience. Courage fused with vulnerability, triumph shadowed by unintended loss. The last flight of George Preddy, like a contrail etched against a pale winter sun, stretches across time and conscience, reminding each generation that bravery, however luminous, remains subject to the tragic geometry of war. The echoes linger in every museum case that holds a blue spinner, in every faded squadron photograph taped to a veteran's fridge, and in the subdued hush that settles over aviation classrooms when instructors recount the perils of friendly fire. They linger because the story resists simple closure. A holiday meant for peace became Preddy's final patrol. A trigger meant for defense felled a guardian. A victory board gained a numeral while a family lost 2 sons within 4 months. Yet, from the asymmetry of gain and loss arises an enduring caution. Honor valor, but temper pride with vigilance. Celebrate skill, but fortify it with identification safeguards. Technology has advanced. IFF squawks now chirp in cockpits where Preddy once glanced only at an ASI and a compass. Yet the human capacity for error remains, as does the human capacity for courage, in spite of that danger. As dusk falls over modern Greensboro, jetliners parade overhead on final approach, beacon lights winking red and white. Somewhere aboard, a passenger might leaf through an in-flight magazine, notice a paragraph about a local war hero, and look out the window. The runway lights align, engines spool down, tires kiss concrete. For a moment the traveler might imagine a P-51 sliding over the same horizon, coolant leaking, pilot fighting for control. In that instant, George Preddy's story leaps decades, binds strangers, and testifies that history is never entirely past. It is a living thread woven through each contrail, each engraving on polished granite, and each quiet reading of a name on Christmas Day. Thus ends the tale of Major George Earl Preddy Jr., blue-nosed ace, son of Greensboro, brother to Bill, mentor to dozens, protector of thousands, and a reminder that in war, as in peace, the brightest human acts often cast the longest shadows. Decades after guns fell silent, the reverberations of Preddy's last flight kept resurfacing in places no one expected. In the late 1960s, when jet bombers began thundering over the Carolina Piedmont on training routes, one of the radar officers stationed at a new air defense facility realized, with a shock, that the east-west corridor he was plotting each day traced almost directly above the stretch of road now called Preddy Boulevard. He wrote a letter to the Air Force Historical Research Agency asking whether the coincidence had ever been intentional. The archivist replied that it was not. Rather, the route had been chosen purely for terrain and air traffic clearance. Yet, the officer, a child on Christmas Day 1944, felt the two paths, one of piston-engine tragedy, one of nuclear-age vigilance, braided together in ways mathematics could not chart. He began telling new recruits the story of the blue-nosed ace each time they cycled through orientation, insisting that an understanding of the past was as essential to defense as any new interceptor missile on the flight line. Memory also stayed alive in the family. Preddy's younger sister Rachel refused to let grief ossify into silence. Through the 1970s and 80s, she toured elementary classrooms across North Carolina, carrying a battered footlocker that contained the few artifacts returned to the family. After the war, George's leather A2 jacket, still smelling faintly of engine oil, a silk escape map folded as tightly as on the day he had tucked it into his flight boot, and the dented dog tags recovered from the crash. She laid each item on a library table, invited pupils to touch them, then asked a simple question: what might courage have cost the people you love? The room always grew terribly still before a dozen hands lifted and the conversation began. Occasionally, however, the weight of history proved too heavy even for those determined to honor it. In 1984, the 8LA gunner who had fired the fateful burst came forward at a reunion of the 430th Battalion in Missouri. For 40 years, he had carried a photograph of Preddy clipped from a Life magazine spread and packed it in every household move, unable to discard the face that stared back like a judgment. At the banquet's open microphone session, he stood, voice trembling, and described the 5-second window in which he had mistaken Mustangs for fuckwolves. He ended with an apology no one present was empowered to accept on Preddy's behalf. Yet another veteran, who had flown P-51s in the Pacific, rose and clasped the gunner's shoulder. "We all shot at phantoms," he said, "and war left no room for perfect vision." The gunner wept openly, and in that moment 70 comrades, infantrymen, mechanics, weather clerks, surrounded him in silence that felt like absolution. The Cold War ended, but the lessons of friend or foe tragedy remained painfully relevant. During the first Gulf conflict, when coalition aircraft operated under desert skies, eerily clear like that Belgian morning, American planners distributed case studies of World War II friendly fire incidents. Preddy's account sat atop the stack, annotated in red, highlighting to draw modern aviators' eyes to the enduring risks of low-level pursuit near ground forces. Pilots absorbed the tale over black coffee before dawn sorties, murmuring disbelief that technology so advanced could still be undone by seconds of misidentification. Some scrawled Preddy rule on their kneeboards: never press an attack so low that friendly guns can lose sight of your markings, because a 60-year-old name still carried the sting of caution. Meanwhile, back in Greensboro, the municipal airport embarked on an ambitious renovation. Local officials invited the Preddy Foundation to design a permanent exhibit for the expanded concourse. When the display opened in 1996, travelers passing from security toward the gates found themselves beneath a suspended, full-scale fiberglass P-51 painted in authentic blue nose livery. Exhaust stacks angled as though the propeller might spin at any moment. Underneath, a touchscreen kiosk let visitors navigate through digitized logbooks, gun camera sequences, and scanned letters from George to his parents. One entry drew particular attention: a short note scrawled on VE Day. He expressed joy at victory, but added a line few schoolbooks ever quoted. "War ends in numbers," he wrote, "but we measure its cost in empty chairs." Commuters hurrying for flights often stumbled on that sentence, slowed, and re-evaluated their own small urgencies. Scholarship, too, evolved. Historians who once favored sweeping analyses of aircraft production began turning toward micro-histories: single missions, individual crews, and the moral fractures exposed in an instant. The friendly fire death of an ace offered a prism through which to examine doctrinal blind spots, psychological stress in gunners, even the physics of light scattering on snow that morning. One doctoral candidate at Cambridge devoted her dissertation to reconstructing weather conditions at exactly 12:34 p.m. on 25 December 1944, correlating cloud layers with after-action reports to show how sun glare could smear recognition paints into anonymity. She concluded that no later doctrinal refinement could fully erase the margin for lethal error so long as humans made split-second choices. Her final chapter returned to Preddy's phrase about empty chairs, arguing that only remembrance, painful, persistent, can supply the humility doctrine alone cannot achieve. Near the turn of the millennium, Digital flight simulators revived interest among a generation for whom World War II existed mainly as monochrome footage in documentaries. Mod teams painstakingly replicated Cripes A Mighty down to chipped paint along panel seams. Mission. Builders recreated the Ardennes patrol so players could test their own ability to distinguish blue-nose Mustangs from 190s at treetop height. Forums erupted in debate. Should the battery have withheld fire? Should Preddy have stayed above 500 feet? And in every thread, someone eventually posted the real outcome, reminding new pilots that the simulation ended with a reset button, while the historical flight did not. Those conversations, paradoxically, granted Preddy something no hero can claim in life: an unending series of second chances bestowed by players determined to avert the tragedy, even if only in pixels. The physical landscape also offered new points of contact. Belgian farmers long knew the meadow where the Mustang crashed. Shards of armor plate and plexiglass still turned up in furrowed soil each spring. In 2004, they petitioned the municipality for permission to erect a modest memorial stone. Funding proved scarce until aviation enthusiasts from 3 continents pooled contributions online. On the 60th anniversary, a granite marker rose beside the hedge that had caught Preddy's wingtip. American diplomats, Belgian veterans, and schoolchildren with NATO flags attended the unveiling. When the local priest recited a blessing, 2 F-16s from the 352nd's modern descendant wing roared overhead, wingtips wagging, a salute across 6 decades of technological change. None of these tributes, of course, can extract tragedy from history. Even now, videos circulate each December on social platforms, pairing carols with gun camera reels, sparking debate about whether such juxtapositions commemorate or sensationalize. Families of men who died in the Bulge sometimes voice discomfort. Their grief is year-round, not seasonal theatre. The Preddy Foundation responds by emphasizing education: teach context, teach empathy, teach the chain of decisions that led to a blue-nose Mustang ending in Belgian snow. And so the narrative keeps growing, not as an easily packaged story, but as a living conversation. Every era finds its own reflection in the events of that Christmas. Cold War strategists saw cautionary warnings about radar identification. Post-9/11 pilots saw the need for rigorous communication between air and ground. Today's drone operators, guiding craft that appear on screens rather than cockpit canopies, still invoke Preddy when discussing split-second target confirmation. His name becomes less a monument to a single man than a shorthand for the persistent challenge of distinguishing friend from foe in a world where speed outpaces certainty. Yet beyond policy and pedagogy, there remains something irreducibly human that continues to draw people to George Preddy's final flight. The picture of a gifted leader who spent his last conscious moments trying to protect bomber crews and wingmen, unaware that those responsible for his safety would, through error, become the instrument of his death. It is an irony too stark to tidy away, an ache that reminds observers why humility must temper every celebration of skill. For within the roar of a Rolls-Royce Merlin and the staccato of Browning guns, there lurked, as there always will, the potential for misdirected fire and unintended loss. On winter nights in Greensboro, when leaves rattle down deserted sidewalks and jetliners hum unseen above low cloud, an almost mythic hush settles over the city blocks where Preddy once delivered newspapers. As a boy, somewhere a porch light flickers against frosted glass, and a man locking his pickup for the evening glances up at a contrail, faintly silvered by moonlight. If he listens hard enough, he might fancy the ghost note of a radial engine beneath the distant turbine whine. Or perhaps he simply feels, without understanding why, a sudden gratitude for those who flew before dawn on the coldest Christmas morning of 1944, wagering their futures so that countless ordinary December nights could pass in peace. Thus, the story continues, not in tidy chapters, but in each fresh act of remembrance, each conversation about vigilance, each scholarship essay quoting the boy who dreamed beside a chain-link fence. George Earl Preddy Jr. belongs now to everyone who strives for excellence, yet knows how swiftly excellence can meet its limit. To everyone who safeguards friends, yet recognizes that even guardians need guarding. And to everyone who hears a fighter's roar across winter skies and wonders for a heartbeat, whether courage can ever truly shield itself from tragic chance.